The video might look a little bit strange because it's my eyes. You may see I had some lower eye surgery done last Monday. It's still scarred, and so it looks like I got either beaten up or it kind of looked like a purple panda. Anyway, it's going to be like this for a couple of months according to the doctor. Sorry for the way I look. Another thing going on is that they're having a prime minister election 27th of September. And so a lot of the LDP members, that's the largest conservative party, are running. And I guess everybody wants to be prime minister, right? There is one person who is running that if I could vote, I would vote for. And I've mentioned his name before in one of the live streams. You know, his name is Taro Kono. Taro Kono is the present digital transformation minister. And he attended Georgetown for 4 years, got his degree in foreign service at Georgetown in 1983. I would think of anybody, he would be the big hope for Japan if they want any kind of new change or new movement. Also, when he was in America, he had also worked for the campaign, a Democratic Party presidential nomination for Alan Cranston. And he also spent a year at the Warsaw School of Economics in Poland. And he actually spent a night in prison or jail because he was arrested after visiting the Solidarity leader, Lech Walesa. For those of you who are as old as I am would know that name, that he was very prominent in the whole movement to, open up Poland. Kono later on said that his visits abroad helped him to see Japan in a very objective way. He's also considered to be a political maverick. That's great, at least from my perspective. However, it might work against him because, as you know, in Japan, it's like the group before the individual. And so what happens is that he may not get it because he's not one of the inner group. And the inner group is usually like the elites, Tokyo University, Kyoto University, maybe Keio, Waseda. And he actually graduated from America, which is really different. He actually got into Keio University and he started it, but he quit so he could go to America where he could graduate from Georgetown University. But in Japan, that's not always looked at as a better thing. We would look at it as great. Wow, international experience, you speak English, you got your degree in 4 years. But in Japan, it could actually work against you sometimes. So we'll see what happens. Kono-san has to do a really delicate dance because he still has to show he's one of the group. At the same time, he has to show that he is different and he can bring change. But the older folks usually are afraid of new change, right? So a lot of times they'll go with the older politicians. So we'll see what happens, but it should be interesting. Now, he wasn't that successful as digital minister, as well as he was in charge of the My Card changeover, and there was a lot of problems there. He was also in charge of the vaccines, and the release Suga, I think, made him in charge of the vaccines, and there was a big struggle there. I don't blame him, for all that had happened because the bureaucracy is so big and it's so huge that thousands and thousands of people that he tried, I'm sure, but he could not move it that well. So he wasn't as successful as I would have hoped him to be. But hopefully if he becomes prime minister, maybe there is hope for Japan to make more larger changes in the future. So we will see. Again, for those of you who are joining late, I just wanted to let you know that my eyes are bruised, not because of a fight or not because I became a zombie, but because I had some eyelid surgery. So in the earlier live streams, we talked about English education in Japan and the internationalization of Japan. And these two topics and today's topics are all, of course, interrelated and connected. There's a lot of overlap. So today's topic is about the concept of how I believe Japan needs what is called global life skills. And this term was taught to me by Sami Takahashi. I see Sami, he's on today. Sami, who's originally from Osaka and has lived in Vancouver, Canada for over 30 years. He's owned and run many English schools. About 20 years ago, when I first became the director of the International Center of Osaka Gakuin University, we met in Honolulu, and he taught me about the concept of global life skills, which he said were assertiveness, leadership, problem solving, and critical thinking. Later on, I would actually add one more thing on. I would add active communication and listening. So basically, these are the 5 I kind of grouped into this global life skills. These global life skills are basically soft skills. So for those of you who know the difference about hard skills and soft skills, hard skills are more teachable abilities that can be measured. They're like test scores, like an IELTS or a TOEFL score. It could be a degree from a university or some kind of shikaku certification from some school, vocational school, or any kind of certification. How fast you can type, computer programmer, anything to do that can be measured. Those are called hard skills. That's where the Japanese are actually very good. And in fact, even in the United States, people tend to be more left-brain in a sense, more on this side. Soft skills are just the opposite. They're more subjective. So a lot of people call them people skills or interpersonal skills. And basically, it's skills that cannot really be measured quantitatively. Skills I talked about before, leadership, assertiveness, problem solving, all of those can't really be measured. And I think that's the difference here. One is more interpersonal, more soft skills, which means cannot be measured, and hard skills can be measured. Now, basically, you need both of them, of course, but most people have hard skills. Not that many people have so many of these soft skills. The Japanese themselves are very good at some of these. I'm going to put all the soft skills together, and under the global life skills is part of these soft skills. But let's just take the soft skill category in general. It's long and there's many of them. But the Japanese themselves are very good at soft skills. For example, time management, punctuality, team building, cooperation, getting along with people, work ethic, even compromise. That's considered a soft skill, being able to compromise and maybe somewhat negotiate. So Japanese are very good at that. Put that on the side. In addition to that, what I would call the global life skills, which are like we just talked about, leadership, critical thinking, assertiveness, problem solving, and active communication. These skills, I believe, that tend to be lacking in Japan. For example, someone who is a problem solver, who is good at problem solving, you have to be like quick, you got to analyze a situation, you have to be able to look at it from different perspectives, you have to be a logical thinker, and you have to objectively be able to address a problem. Now, many people who are very intelligent, have high test scores and grades, may not often be the best problem solvers. They may be brilliant, and so it's a different skill to be a problem solver than just being smart or intelligent. I believe, personally, this is my opinion, that many of the bureaucrats who make these programs for internationalization and for English education are more of this type. They're brilliant. They got photographic memories, because for the test, if you have a photographic memory, many times you can get into Tokyo University because it's just putting on information onto the test. But a lot of them, I don't believe, have that so-called problem solving skill or that so-called critical thinking. I think it requires a different way of learning, a different way of seeing things, and experiences. Getting a lot of different experiences. I think that's the only way to really kind of learn this type of soft skills. That's why I believe a lot of times the policy created by the government is not in the best interest of, let's say, students or the society in general. When we talk about soft skills, adaptability, communication skills, intercultural communication skills is a big one, creative thinking, teamwork, time management, and even motivation, negotiation, conflict resolution. These are all part of it. As you can see, they're much harder to learn. You just don't go into a classroom and learn these soft skills. You can learn them, but it takes time and you have to be actually experienced, go through that. But soft skills are the key because it helps you work with one another. And the global life skills are necessary to be successful outside of Japan, even within Japan, but outside of Japan especially. And if you look at something like the TED Talks on YouTube has been in existence for over 40 years. And if you see, they have the most innovative and visionary ideas. And again, that's because I think the United States fosters this environment of critical thinking and problem solving. Very different. Like a lot of times Western education asks the question, why? And I referred back to this in one of my previous live streams. In Japan, the tendency, they're studying the what, but in Western education, many times they're focusing on the why, more of a Socratic type of way of thinking. And everybody is supposed to have an opinion. In fact, Sammy, who is on right now, had told me the story about, and I want to make sure I get this correct, Sammy. When he first went to Fresno State to study, after he graduated 4 years from a university, I think Kansai University, he went to study at Fresno State University. And I remember him telling me that in one of his first classes, the professor asked him a question, and he said, I think that Sammy said, I don't know. I don't have an answer. And he got scolding. He got reprimanded. And I think the professor said something to the effect of, everybody has an opinion. If you don't have an opinion, then you need to leave, or something like that. Is that right, Sammy? And that's what's really emphasized in America. We all have an opinion. We're independent thinker, that we're supposed to have an opinion. But in Japan, let's say, for example, like when I'm teaching, a lot of my students will say, I don't know. In a way, it's kind of an easy way to just escape. I don't know. But in America, they hold you to that. Like everyone's supposed to have an opinion. And that goes back to the idea, I think, of critical thinking. Sammy wrote that I got kicked out. Wow. So he got kicked out because he didn't have an opinion in his first class at Fresno State. Is that right, Sammy? So again, that was overly extreme, it seems, but it was a Spanish discussion class and he got kicked out. Was it because you said you didn't know or that you didn't have an opinion? So he got asked for his opinion, he didn't have an opinion, and he got kicked out. This is in a Spanish class in America, Fresno State. I remember that story because I was just so surprised, but Sammy wrote that he was shocked. I would be shocked if someone said to me, if I said I don't know and someone says get out. If that was the case in Japan, you wouldn't have any students, right? So again, having an opinion in the United States is all part of being an independent thinker, which is also part of the whole soft skills or the global life skills. So besides the 5 that I talked about, I like to expand that more to like independent thinking, risk taking, a lot of these other soft skills that still are not that common in Japan. Jason said maybe they didn't think he was taking school seriously. Wow. I don't know. It sounds like the Professor Miguel was quite angry. And let's see. Sammy then wrote, the same thing happened last week itself. Oh, at his school. Were you the one kicking out the student? Because you're the teacher or the principal now, right? His school, that a lot of the Japanese students don't really participate or are unmotivated. And that really they have no gumption. They don't seem to have an idea of why they're even there, or why they're going to Canada to study. It's quite sad that they have this amazing opportunity, but because of the lack of motivation or the lack of interest, and it could go back to what we talked about during the English language education live stream. A substitute teacher who had never taught a group of Japanese students told her students to think. And then what happened, Sammy? I'm assuming that nobody answered, right? It's really hard to teach students who don't participate or don't respond. This is really a struggle that I think a lot of teachers go through. They didn't say anything for more than 5 minutes. So think of it. If you're a teacher, you're standing and you ask people questions and you're sitting there or standing there for 5 minutes and there's silence. Especially for a Western teacher, it has to be really, really uncomfortable. You would become very annoyed or irritated. I think that the idea of the global life skills that I'm referring to is like about independent thinking, having an opinion, being an independent thinker. Teacher told them to use their brain. Maybe they didn't understand brain, but I'll just keep putting up what Sammy is slowly sending in. There's a slight delay too on the comments itself. And let's see, J Star says here, Japanese students can sometimes appear uninterested. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to know because they had a lot of Japanese students have kind of a stoic look, right? They just kind of sit there. They don't have affect. They're just kind of sitting there. And it makes it very kind of difficult. Sammy wrote, the teacher got frustrated and said, if you're not interested in participating in my class, just leave. So, Sammy, did they leave? Or did the teacher leave? What happened? Sometimes it's like pulling teeth, right? Get some of the students to speak. No matter how good a teacher you are, I used to think I was a pretty good teacher, but I have struggled when I was teaching at the University of Hawaii, their English program. And those are the summer programs that used to come over. They call them special English program, like for 2 weeks, they would come over and they came more for fun. They were coming for vacation, right? It was a paid, get credit, vacation paid for by their parents. Didn't want to study. And I had them for 4 hours a day. I remember becoming real ira-ira. Ira-ira means irritated. 5 students ended up leaving the classroom. Wow, that's surprising. They all came to me and complained because Sammy is the principal or the person who runs the school. So they thought the teacher was rude. How interesting, right? Here you have kind of misunderstanding almost. The students think the teacher is rude. The teacher probably is thinking the students are uninterested or just the students are rude in the ways that they don't even want to participate. Like, why are you here? That was probably what was going on. A complete miss. Good thing Sammy is there. He can do the intercultural mix. And then it becomes harder from the second class. If that same teacher is teaching, you already have the tension in the class. And yeah, it would be hard. But this refers more back to the English education and the whole idea of Japanese students not being motivated. But definitely, even if they are in Canada, you would think that they would be motivated because they're there. They're actually using it every day. It's not like studying in Japan. I understand. Maybe they're not interested because the moment they finish the class, they're in Japanese and no big deal. But if you're in Canada and you're there, you would assume that students would want to learn and to be interested. Unless they knew nothing. Their level was so low that they couldn't even say, this is a pen. If they couldn't do that, then maybe they're just so embarrassed that they just shut up and sit down and say nothing. In Japan, they need to somehow incorporate some of these global life skills into the curriculum. So this is what Sammy says to the 5 5 students who came to complain. So I had to explain to the Japanese students that the way North American students are taught totally different. It goes back to active learning, and that's a soft skill. Active learning, active listening, being assertive and asking questions, right? In Japanese universities, no students ask questions. Rarely. I remember when I was going to Doshisha graduate school, this is like over 30 years ago, the teachers sometimes would ask if there were questions, and I used to sit in the front row. I remember raising my hand, asking the teacher of journalism class, I remember. Oka Sensei was his name. And I said, Oka Sensei, and I asked him in Japanese a question. He was so shocked. He got almost like flustered and nervous. And then he didn't know what to say. And then he didn't answer my question, but he said something that had nothing to do with my question. And then he kind of grabbed his papers and shuffled them together, and then he left the class. I don't know if he was embarrassed that I asked or so shocked that I asked. And there was the moment for me to realize that I'm not supposed to ask questions in Japan. It's not common. So from that moment on, in those regular undergraduate courses, that was an undergraduate course I was taking just to learn more about Japanese broadcasting. I'm not supposed to ask questions. I found that common throughout all the classes that were, even some of the graduate courses. When the sensei says, "Shitsumon arimasu ka?" Do you have any questions? That's like saying, "See you next week," because nobody asks questions. Now remember, another thing that's interesting is nobody goes to office hours. Office hours were only created maybe, I don't know how many, 10 years ago, I'm not really sure, but it wasn't that long ago. The Japanese system incorporated because the American system does it. When I used to teach in University of Alaska, before a test, after a test, in for homework, I had people lined up out of my door, sitting down, waiting to see me as a teacher. But in Japan, in 10 years, you know how many students actually came to my office during office hours? One, Atsushi, the football player, who had to graduate from my course. It was his 5th or 6th year, and my course was the one he needed to pass. A lot of times the academic affairs, they come to you, the staff, and they said, "Please, Sensei, let him pass." And I said, "No, I'm not. He has to do the work." And so I talked to Atsushi directly, nicely, and I said, "You need to get 81 on his final exam because you had a 70 something." He did okay on the first exam, not great, but he wanted to pass. He took the final, and I said, "You can come and see me at my office." He's the only one that ever came because he needed to know if he was going to graduate. Atsushi, I still remember his name. And he actually got a 78. He didn't get an 81. So I gave him the test back, and he saw the score, and he was so sad. But I said, "You put in the effort. You're only 3 points away. You'll graduate. Don't worry. You did well, Atsushi. Good job. You tried hard. I know it was tough, and I know I was strict with you." He was so happy. But again, that's the only time that someone came to my office in 10 years. 10 years. I also explained to the substitute teacher. Oh, it was a substitute teacher. Okay, so that's also different, right? It was a replacement teacher. It wasn't someone who already knew them or knew how they would be, or maybe, wasn't as skilled at getting students to interact, kind of expected them that they would just start talking. If you had maybe Chinese students or European students or Brazilian students, they just jump in, I'm sure. I also explained to the substitute teacher that Japan students are not think on their own. No independent thinking, right? Just do what you're told. Sammy also wrote, they spend a lot of time memorizing useless stuff. That goes back to the rote memory. A lot of it is just rote memory is what they're doing. Okay, let's see. Dave B wrote, if you don't ask questions, how do you learn? Yeah, how do you learn? How do you learn? Does it just osmosisly, I guess you have to look at it, Dave. The Japanese system is built on a Confucian model, Confucian style, which originated in China and basically is still over Asia in a lot of ways. You see a lot of, Korea, China, a lot of places still do this system where the teacher is like the sage, has all the wisdom and knowledge, and the students are basically just there to obediently learn, take notes, and then for the test, they put it on the test. Even to ask questions. I remember someone told me this at like a big presentation. This is long ago though. I think it's changed by now, but before it was like, you're not supposed to ask questions to some great speaker because it's like, who are you, someone so low, to be asking that great person a question? It was so silly, I thought. The person asking the question has more status than the person answering the question. I mean, it was some really bizarre way of logic that they said, you're not supposed to ask a question. Even to the speaker, you're not supposed to say, oh, you did very well, because that's like you complimenting them. That puts the leverage like this, and that you are higher than them. All you're supposed to say is, 勉強になりました. gozaimashita. Thank you. I learned a lot. I thought that was crazy. Now I know it's changed, but that's how it was before. So imagine that kind of thinking. It's like you cannot even ask a question or you cannot even compliment them because the leverage of teacher or great one or whoever it is on a pedestal. Who are you, meebo feeble you, to ask any kind of question, right? Now that has changed, but again, that stigma kind of still remains. So that's what it is. It's basically passive learning. Your lectures, students take notes, test, gone. That's it. Pure rote learning. And that's why I believe, and I'm going back to the global life skills, Tokyo University graduates at Kyoto University are brilliant as far as knowledge. They have it up here. They can write English. They know English, but they write it like a textbook, but they don't have that flexibility or the creativity. A lot of them, I'm sure some do. And so that's why the policies and the more wide thinking is not possible. They're doing just a narrow vision, and that's Japan's problem. And that's why the new prime minister, I hope, will be Taro Kono, because I believe lived in America 4 years, got a degree, worked for a campaign, went to Poland, that he was defense minister before. He has several positions as minister. He can do it. It's just that I don't know if he can get elected because he's kind of an outsider. And again, remember, the group versus the individual is really tough here. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope he can get something. I mentioned this book before. I wrote this book after I did the Ship for World Youth trip. The Ship for World Youth is a government prime minister cabinet's office project. It's been in existence for over 30 years. It's amazing program, but it's a super expensive program. Anyway, for 30 days, 230 participants under the age of 30 are on a ship together. They sail to different destinations, Sri Lanka, Australia, Palau. And so I was fortunate and privileged enough to be hired after I left the university to be an advisor on the ship first, and later a couple of times I was a facilitator. And this program is the perfect laboratory because you have 230 young participants, 130 from Japan, who most of them are just graduated or maybe in their senior year. You have 130 foreign participants from 13 countries, 10 from 13 countries. You have them all on the ship. It's the perfect laboratory. So I'm on the ship watching. Once you're on the ship, you cannot run away. There's no place to go. It's like an island. It's like in America, you got the television show Survivor. It's like that. They're on the ship. They cannot leave. The best thing is there's no Wi-Fi or internet on the ship because it's way out in the ocean. Each of the rooms, there's usually 2 Japanese, 1 foreign person. They're on the ship, and every day they're super busy. Courses, there are programs, there's culture events, there's clubs. It's always super busy. What happens is there you could see how the Japanese fare in an international group. And no matter what, the gap is so huge. The gap is because of several things. A lot of it is the global life skills. But language is big, of course. If they don't speak English well, then they cannot communicate, and then they cannot make friends internationally. And so a lot of them, the first week, I remember coming to me, crying. I cannot communicate with my roommates or my cabin mates. I'm just, I cannot make friends. I don't know what to say. And they're crying. And again, by then it's too late. They're either on the ship or they're going to go on the ship. It's right before. All I can do is encourage them and said, you just got to do what you can, because right now it's not the time to start studying English. You should have studied 2 or 4 or 5 years ago. Now is the time to just smile and do your best to communicate and make big gestures and do your best. And I said, after a couple of weeks, you'll get a little bit better and you'll feel a little more comfortable. But the first 2 weeks, at least, you're going to struggle, and just be ready for that. Manage your expectations. But of course, it's a daunting task, right? But anyway, what I saw on the ship was all the global life skills we talked about were basically inadequate or non-existent for the Japanese young people. Granted, they were more immature or younger, because most of them in Japan, they don't start work and then quit and then come on to the ship or join this program, right? In Japan, once you get employed, normally you stay. You don't do this kind of thing where you take a break, gap year, not heard of, right? So they were much younger. They were in maybe 20 to 23, 24 maybe. Maybe you had a couple that came back from JICA or something, but basically young. Overseas people tended to be people who were already working. Few students, but they were much more mature. But just not that. It was the global life skills, the assertiveness, the leadership, problem solving, all of those things, active learning, asking questions. The gap was so huge. And then I realized, yes, English is, a major component, but it was more also about the global life skills. They didn't know how to ask questions. They didn't know how to do small talk. Now for Westerners, small talk, especially Americans, it's like obvious, right? Stand in the supermarket line and you talk to the person in front of you or behind you, or cashier, or to the person pushing the cart boy, or whoever, or cart girl, whoever. So in Japan, they don't do small talk. So you might ask, well, how do they start a conversation? Well, normally someone introduces you, or I know older people like to use the weather, like, oh, samui desu ne, it's cold, or atsui desu ne. That's the kind of to break the ice, whatever. But small talk is not common in Japan. So that skill alone seems so atarimae, like so obvious, but it wasn't. So that's when I got this idea that I should write this book. So I wrote the book, although it didn't really sell. And there is a Japanese version that's in Kindle. I didn't make it in hard copy because it wasn't going to sell. I think that any Japanese person who's going to go abroad or wants to have a more international mindset should read this book, or read it in Japanese for that matter. Kindle is cheap. I'm not trying to sell a book, but I'm just saying that I wrote it for a purpose. The relationship between the teacher and the student is like that of senpai, kohai, joshi, and buka. Yes. So senpai, senior, kohai, junior, joshi, and buka, boss, and you call people who work under the boss, subordinates, teacher, and student. That's the Confucian system. And that's what Japan and China and Korea and much of Asia have, that idea of the Confucian system. So yes, as Sammy wrote. Okay, Sammy writes, happened last Thursday. A Japanese student who was 15 and came to my school 3 years came by my school to talk to my students from Japan. His English was at pre-intermediate level. Then he went to a local high school and graduated as an honor student. He's going to the University of Toronto. After this Labor Day weekend, now he speaks like a native speaker. A lot of my students who heard him got so inspired. Great! They started asking him a lot of questions, one after the other. They asked him questions in Japanese. They were much older than this student. They were using keigo to talk with him. Keigo means honorifics. That should be K-E-I-G-O. So here he is, the 15-year-old student who's younger than these students, but they respected or admired him. They started using honorifics to him, because normally in Japan, they know right away the age. They can, like in a 15-year-old compared to a student, it's easy to see. They would have definitely spoken in simple form to him, and he was kind of expected to use keigo or more of an honorary form to them. But it was reversed, I think is what Sammy is saying. So that tells you that the students who were asking him questions were inspired. So maybe that's the role model. More than having international foreign students as models for students, like probably, and I believe this, and that's why I think Sammy is the perfect example for Japanese, because he's Japanese. He went to Japanese school, he went to Japanese university, and here he is where he is today. I think Japanese will only start to accept that I can be like him or her when they see a good role model. And this 15-year-old student, for those university students a little bit older, they probably were thinking, wow, he's so young and look where he got. And I think that's what you want to do, right, Sammy? And all of you, who teach, is you need to bring in role models that inspire these students. Because I know when we did professional development, faculty development at our university, and I was the faculty development chairman, I brought in a group from Hawaii, Kapilani Community College, Bengpo Yoshikawa and her group. And they were fantastic, teaching about student-centered and everything, all the concepts that I wanted them to learn. A lot of the Japanese teachers did come, but what I realized is that at the end, the Japanese teachers, they might, oh, great, or that's wonderful. But I think if you have a Japanese person, then Japanese are more motivated and they're more inspired, more like, I can do that, he or she is doing. So yes, I think having like Sammy, the 15-year-old student, high school student, was the perfect example. And it's interesting that he was younger, and then they actually probably were more excited in a way that said, hey, he can do it, we can do it. So getting back to the ship, what I was saying is that on the ship, I could see for 1 month in a purely cut off environment, right? Because we're going to 2 ports, but otherwise we're always on the ship. I could see exactly where the Japanese level was. And so after the first trip, I wrote this book. And then, me, right? Continuous improvement. So I wrote up a whole 15-page summary of what I thought needed to be done to improve the ship world youth. I sent it to the non-profit company that runs it with the cabinet office. Remember in my last couple of videos, I said the standing nail gets pounded down. And I knew that if I sent in this 15-page summary, I had it translated in good Japanese, and I was about to send it, when the person who helped me translate it said to me, Mike, you send this in. This is like banzai suicide charge. you know what's going to happen. And I said, yeah, probably not going to be invited back, because you have to be invited back. And the person in charge was the person she was a lady in charge of nonprofit organization. She didn't really like me because I was always asking questions. So you ask too many questions. People don't like you after a while because you're like a pain in the side. But anyway, I sent it. And sure enough, I was fired. Not necessarily fired, but never asked to come back. Although everybody else, my evaluations are all very good. No problem. But I was the only one not invited back. That was because I was the standing nail pounded down. And so I never returned to the ship. It was 3 years later that the lady who really did not like me, she had to leave for some reason, something she did. And someone else came on who I knew, brought me back 2 more voyages of the ship. Those 2 voyages verified, confirmed everything I wrote in this book after the first trip. So I know that this is correct as far as what the Japanese need. The problem is that Japanese language education system and the Japanese education system don't really understand a lot of these concepts. They don't know what to do. What can they do to input this? As I said to you in an earlier live stream, they were going to actually put in an open-ended question, which was the first time they were doing something unique. Not set answers, but open-ended questions it was going to be the math or the science, I think. It wasn't going to be English. And I was all like, yay, they're going to do something. And they killed it. It just died. So even that attempt was by the ministry, because change is so slow and hard. People don't want change. And as I said before, also risk-taking, that's a soft skill. That's a global life skill. Japanese are not risk takers. In fact, talked about the Hofstede research that showed that risk avoidance, Russia was the #1 country, avoids risk, and #2 was Japan. If you look at that kind of tells you if you're risk avoidance, you don't want change. So change in Japan is super hard, and that's why this election with the prime minister is kind of big. I hope Taro Kono gets it. I don't think he will because he's kind of an outsider to the big group. So the present system is broken. If I look at what we've talked about in the last 3 live streams about the internationalization and globalization of Japan, companies, society, universities, language education, and the idea of these soft skills, global soft skills that need to be implemented into Japan K through 12 if possible. By university, it's a little bit late, but even at university level, it's not being done now. And so that's why they need to go abroad, because that's the only place they'll get some taste of it, I believe, right now. And maybe having, like immigration and foreigners coming in to work with students or international students coming in, that also helps them with the internationalization, as well as some of these global life skills they start to learn. Having an opinion, being an independent thinker, being a risk taker, things like spontaneity, improvisation. All of these too are soft skills that you don't see in Japan. In the end, the Japanese can choose whatever soft skills they want or not want. But I think to be competitive in the world and outside, like on the ship, I would like to see one day where the Japanese delegation, which has half, that they are at the same level. Because on the ship, the Japanese cannot be the leaders, although they should be because they're the host. They have half of the ship's participants. It's always like this. So they let some of them be heads as figureheads. And there are some that are really good they're returnees, kikokusei, but yet there's still a gap. I hope one day Japanese delegation, the leaders, be at least even as to the international participants. And I think that's not impossible. That should be an easy fix. But again, it needs to be implemented earlier within the school system, educational system, the university system, the companies. But when will that happen? We talk about the opposites. Like, for example, Japan is very traditional versus progressive, group versus individual, or hierarchy versus flat. I think maybe in 2 weeks, I will talk about that as another live stream about different cultural values. Cultural values and, of course, education are, different cultural values that, of course, people behave and interact, respond in certain ways, or communicate in certain ways because of the cultural values, right? Something like being quiet. Dave B had asked about questions. And I said, like in Japanese university, nobody asks questions. How do you learn, right? They just take at face value what the professor or teacher said and put it on a test, I guess. But how do you implement, because the cultural value is silence is golden, or not talking. Like, when people are, another thing is like a simple thing, like when people are eating. I remember when I was teaching, when I first came to Japan, I was teaching at an English company, TCLC, Tokyo Culture of Language Center, Osaka. And when we would go out to lunch with the staff, and this is not only there, I also see it, I've seen it before at other places that I've taught. when you have Japanese staff and you have like English teachers that go out for lunch, foreigners love to talk, small talk, big talk, ask questions, make jokes, be funny, etc., etc. But the Japanese staff tend to be very quiet and just eat, and they focus on eating. And if you watch the movie Tampopo, how many of you have seen the movie Tampopo? That I think also reflects. It's an old film, great movie. It's really kind of interesting how they put like food and somehow like the sexuality and the whole idea of that within the film. But anyway, there's a scene where the mother is dying and then cooks her last meal for the family. The family is eating the last meal. It's a parody. It's supposed to be a satire. And the father is saying, eat, just be quiet and eat. And the whole idea is that eating is supposed to be quiet. I can't say sacred time, but just a quiet time. Or for foreigners, it's a social time to interact in things. And again, that's a cultural value. So it's not that the Japanese are wrong in what they're doing. If they want to be more competitive outside of Japan, if they want to be more influential, more accepted player in the world, I think they need to also absorb and incorporate a lot of these global life skills along with the skills that they do very well. At the end, they will decide what's best to be. I think right now, there's a lack of a lot of these global life skills. So in situations like on the ship, they're unable to actually participate, or they don't know what to do. Another one of the global life skills is assertiveness. That's a big one, to be assertive. And to be assertive is to ask questions, right? That comes almost like together. Japanese are not assertive. They're more passive. That's why I always used to tell the students, if you go to America and you're not assertive, nobody's coming to feel sorry for you, or no one's coming to ask you. You don't ask, nobody's coming. I was kind of scaring them in a way, but the point was that you have to ask, because you might think that in Japan, a lot of the foreigners, especially if you're Caucasian or maybe non-Japanese looking, the Japanese are really kind. Even in Korea, the Asians are very kind to foreigners, who look foreign. Not me, but to look foreign. And they treat them very well, kind of put on a pedestal. And I said, if you expect when you go to America that people are going to treat you, because you're a visitor, that they're going to treat you nicely or extra nice, not in America. Everybody's going to be treating you the same as everybody else. It's equal. So if anything, you might be treated not as nicely because maybe your English is not as good, or maybe you're out of step with something. So you really gotta put your radar up and your antennas up, and you gotta be reading the situation, and you gotta be assertive, and you gotta be asking questions, and you gotta be looking and learning. You cannot be passive in America. And so I used to give them these big pep talk. J-Star Dream writes, it all goes back to the lack of immigration, no natural intercultural. And that's true. It goes back to the two things. And I think I said it in the last live stream also. Two-prong would be that the 1-2 punch is sending as many students as you can for degree seeking, not a short term like 2 weeks or 4 weeks or even 1 semester. Minimum 1 year if possible. But even that's just tasting, tapas, pupus. Oh, this is nice, we're having a great time. No, you need to go for a degree. Second is immigration. They need to open up. But again, everyone fears, and it's true, with positive and good things from immigration come underside, the dark side, negative side, the drugs, whatever, human trafficking, different. You can't control everything. But I still believe that you can do your best to filter as best you can. And I did mention before, like I have suggested to our company that if you need IT, why don't you go to India, where they have unemployed IT graduates, like 27% or 28%. I'm sure a lot of people brilliant that are willing to come to Japan can set up a system to take care of them. Problem there is that companies in Japan, they don't know how, or they're not willing to invest setting up a support system. So they go back to the old way. They hire Japanese students who have not graduated in IT or technology. Let's say someone in sociology or someone in economics, train them. And I think about how long that takes to teach someone program or teach someone about reading code. I cannot even imagine how long that learning curve must be. 3 years, 5 years. And that's their investment. They're paying this person all the time, but then in their mind, better than bringing in someone from the outside that we got to set up like housing and set up like Japanese lessons, and we have to have translators to take them to the doctor. It's all a matter of what's your priority. If Japan would do more of going out, it would also help internationalize their company, as well as it would also then give more diversity to Japan. And diversity is the key. This falls under soft skill, but it's not a soft skill itself. It's having confidence. I think that's one of the hugest things that a lot of Japanese lack, is confidence. For whatever reason, they don't have the confidence. And if you don't have the confidence, it's hard to be assertive. How do you give students the opportunities to build and create confidence? I think it's only through different experiences. And to do that, it could be domestic, volunteering, going up to wherever like Notohanto and volunteering after the earthquake or something. But they need to have an array of experiences to slowly build their confidence. That's the biggest challenge, I think. Not only language, it's confidence, the ability to willing to take chances and to take risk. Like, for example, I did that podcast video about Hiroki. He's studying in Canada. And one of his biggest observations was, he goes, yeah, the Canadians, they're not afraid of anything. Even if like he's thinking like, oh, maybe they're not qualified or they're not really at that level, they take it on. Now, sometimes as Westerners will say they can do a lot more than they actually can, but they're not afraid to take the risk, or take the chance. And if they fail, they fail, right? And I think that's also another big point, is that Japanese are afraid of failing. And I think, no matter what, anybody, I'm American, I don't want to fail, but you try. And if you fail, then, as Google always says, if you're going to fail fast, fail forward. They have those 7 rules about failing. I think that Japanese have to learn that failing is okay. You learn from it and you move forward. That's a lot how like Americans think, right? Fail and keep moving forward, right? In America, they love the underdog. They love that second chance, right? In Japan, it sounds very strict. Like I saw at the company, not this company, but another company, like someone told me, if you fail once, nobody will ever give you a second chance. So you cannot fail. I said, how can you be so strict, right? Everybody fails, right? So in that case, if you only get one chance, nobody's going to try. Because why try why risk it? You have the chance of failing. So the system again has created fearful people of failure. And that also affects their confidence. They're too worried about failing, but they don't have the confidence to take that risk. So all of that is like this. I can't explain it, psychologically, but that are some of the problems that are connected to global life skills. It's connected to language, connected to other things. Making friends is the most difficult thing most Japanese students who study abroad. That's the number one above everything. They cannot make friends with local people. They can make friends with Japanese easily, but they want to make local friends. A hard time. That's why for those of you who live outside of Japan, and if you have Japanese students coming in, friend them or reach out to them, it'd be much happier because they have this problem. And making friends takes what? Assertive, risk. You have to have good presentation skills. Presentation means present yourself with a smile, or inviting someone to coffee or something. That's assertiveness. So global life skill. It says, how does Japan innovate and create great products? Innovation encourage, avoiding risk more important. This is a really interesting question. Japan does come out with many innovative products. But I would say that a lot of the creativity is not actually encouraged in schools. But I think when they get into the companies, that if they're working in the research section or something, that a group of them all kind of work. So there are creative people in Japan. It's just that there's not that many outlets for them. I actually believe that the most creative people in Japan actually go into manga. They don't go into like making movie, television show. Because I think to become like work in the movies as a creator or producer, like writing up a story or movie, takes too long. Like a Japanese style, you might have to carry the director's bag 5 years before you can even be, carry the lights next. I don't know. I'm exaggerating, but so it's very difficult but in manga, right away, you can just start drawing and you can just produce and you can publish actually. I think there are creative people, and I think the most creative people actually go with manga, maybe eventually anime. Now, maybe that's why anime is so good, manga is so good in Japan. That's where all your creative people usually go, because it's the easiest route. It's not like washing the rice for 2 years before you can work, like even cut the fish in a sushi bar. These are probably outdated, but you always used to hear those stories how in Japan, you gotta like prove yourself. You gotta show them that you are persistent, endure, and gamang. Gamang wa bitoku. Gamang is endure or withstand, is a virtue. That's one of the old sayings. Is innovation encouraged? Innovation is encouraged, but avoiding risk, almost like sometimes it's a wash, it cancels. So it's hard. And it depends on your boss. It depends on what kind of president you have. Because of the system where it's more of a samurai style, top person, if they're very innovative and creative and they encourage that, yes, go. But if they're more conservative, they're only worried about cost. And I think that's where I feel it's really sad that Japanese companies don't empower their younger people and engage them to give them more autonomy, create or to come up with ideas, continuous improvement, or how to do things better. Everybody is just listening and everybody becomes a yes man as the top says this. And so how can you have a creative company or staff when everybody is a yes man, top person above that? It's not a good environment. And maybe it worked after the war for the first 50 years to have a very disciplined, strict, and hardworking staff. staff. But with today's young people, they have to do something different. The people on top, they don't get it that they have to change the way they encourage and raise, grow young people working now. Because if not, they're going to quit. I read somewhere, and this was 10 years ago, it's probably more now, 1/3 of the people who go into companies now will quit 3 to 5 years. I'm sure it's higher. So there's still this idea of life employment, in the sense that normally you stay with a company for most of your life, all of your life. But the idea of tenshoku, or changing job, has become much more prevalent. But again, it's still, the system is still in transition. Right now, Japan is going into transition. And that's why it's hard. The young people who are talented, who I see even at my company, I wish they were the leaders or the bosses. They cannot be until the older people leave, which will be whatever the retirement age is. So it's tough. It's tough being Japanese at times. That way, I feel a little bit sorry at times, but that it is what it is, right? Yes, I'm sorry, Davey. Getting back to your question, it could be a wash. It just depends. I always think like maybe working for like some place like the 100 yen shop, like Daiso. I wonder how that staff, their staff are. They must be like all the creative people, right? Coming up with those ideas of 100 yen products, like, oh, this is for hanging your socks, or this is for drying your shoe, or things that I wouldn't have even thought about. Every time I go to the 100 yen shop, I go, oh, who thought of these ideas? Or maybe it's the company in China creating them. I don't know. But I would think that the Japanese staff come up with a lot of the ideas. So the 100 yen shop staff is the people one day I would like to meet. Like, who is creating all of these amazing, interesting, unique, funky, kind of geeky things, right? A thing for everything, you know, thing to hold your little pen, or, you know what I'm saying. Or this, like the tear with the hand scotch tape. I love this. This started, at the 100 yen shop, you can buy 3 rolls for 100 yen. This is that, I carry it every place I go when I travel, because I use it for like if I eat some peanuts and I want to seal the bag or anything, that you can tear it with your hand. It's so convenient. This is one of the best things that the 100 yen shop ever did. These hand tearing scotch tape, or tape as you would call it, cellophane tape. So anyway, Sammy says self-esteem is quite low for the Japanese. Yes, self-esteem is low, and that's why there's a lack of confidence. There's another one from Sammy. They're afraid of making mistakes. Yeah, it goes back to what I said. Everybody's afraid of getting scolding, or maybe that's their last chance, their only one and only chance. That's really sad that it's all or nothing, right? And so you fail once, blacklisted. That's it for life. That's really sad. Sammy says, that's true. You don't get a second chance in Japan. Okay, Sammy just verified what I just said before this. It's really sad. And here Dave B says, failure is not an option. It is a requirement to grow. Sometimes the best opportunities come from failure. Yes, that's exactly how most Americans think, and so Westerners think. That's why they have to kick that failure thing out of Japan, but they're not able to because of it's just so locked in. It's like concrete that's set. It's like when you make concrete, right? When you make concrete, you gotta put it into containers of the shape you want before it solidifies. Once it solidifies, game over, right? I don't know when and how in Japan you're going to be able to get the concrete for, is it the students, the university students? Is it like before they solidify into concrete? How do you get them to take the shape, change, or make change? Okay, let's see. J-Star says, fail up, fail better, fail forward, let's go. Yeah, that's a lot to do with the Google model too. J-Star says, Mike is an advocate. Mike is an avoidance. Avoidance equally encouraged. Avoidance, yes. Avoidance is, I think, a way of not having to directly say no. For example, when I write a lot of emails in my office, a lot of times I don't get any answer, which in America, or it's like rude, right? You could at least say, oh, thank you, or get back to you. You don't just ignore it. But in Japan, many times, whether I ask too many questions, maybe sometimes in English, but sometimes even in Japanese, I don't get an answer. I think it's a way of avoiding. Means if you avoid, you don't have to really answer. So you don't have to say yes or no. And maybe they don't want to say no to me because say no is maybe they consider rude. Say no to me. I'm older. I don't know. So it's just easier not to answer. But yes, even when I was teaching at the University of Alaska, there was a Japanese professor, Hokkaido, I remember. And she, when I wrote to her, she would never answer because she didn't want to say no. Because a lot of my questions were, okay, I want to do this. Can I do this? And she didn't want me to do it. But instead of answering, sorry, that's not what I want. She was the head of the department at that time. She just wouldn't answer. So avoidance is a way of Japanese saying no. But sometimes it's also a reason if you write to someone, let's say you're traveling, or you write to some tourist bureau or somewhere and you ask a question in English, many times you may not get an answer. And the reason is not because they're avoiding you. It's more about if it's in English and they don't have anyone who's good in English, they'll just put it in a box like later. And it usually gets forgotten, right? I've done that too. Sometimes I get a lot of messages in Japanese and I said, okay, I'm gonna read it later. And sometimes I forget to go back to it. It's an extra step. So sometimes there's that. There's not too many excuses you can give because it's Google Translate. You can just, translate it. But again, that's an extra step. And maybe some people are really busy. So yes, sometimes the avoidance is they don't have the time. It gets pushed off, especially like English emails. Or sometimes the questions that foreigners ask are too inquisitive or too complicated or they have to go and look for the answer, that they put it on the side till later, it disappears, or maybe they purposely put it on the side and it disappears. I don't know. Again, yes, avoidance is a very, I want to say common, but it's not uncommon. That's a way of just not dealing with it. It's a passive aggressive way of not dealing with it. Add that to the list of when you go back to soft skills about being diligent about communication. You gotta respond. Even if you have to say no or I'll get back to you, you have to respond to every email. I want to thank all of you for being on today. Again, I'm sorry about my eyes. As I said before, I had eyelid surgery. In 2 weeks, I will be on again. We'll probably do something about cultural values and differences, East and West. Very similar to today, maybe. They're all interlinked, right? But I always find them very interesting. People don't actually really always look at, how are they all connected? English is actually connected to nationalization, which connects soft skills. It's all connected. I just wanted to discuss this with those of you who are interested. See you in 2 weeks. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you for so much interaction today. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. And thanks again for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Till next time. ありがとうございました。